Good morning, my friends, and welcome to another incredible installment of Monday Reload. From very high above, all the puerile and insipid forms of Wyoming mainstream media, this is Cowboy State Politics. I, of course, am your illustrious host, David Iverson, firmly and permanently ensconced behind the silver Cowboy State Politics microphone and broadcasting to you from the base of the Bighorns at the Cowboy State Politics studio in Sheridan, Wyoming. Good morning, my friends, and welcome to the program. Happy Monday. As you no doubt have realized, Christine and I made it back from our adventure in the Middle Swamp. Normally, I would never say that wading in hip-deep into Wyoming's capital city would be enjoyable. Christine and I did have a pretty good time for the most part. I had never been to a fitness competition before. Now, of course, I've been to any number of gyms where athletes are engaged in toning their respective physiques, but I've never been in a situation to watch them put it all on display. Christine was competing in the deadlift competition. She was able to lift 205 pounds. I'm extraordinarily proud of her. I don't think I would ever get on stage and show everybody how much I could lift. I was shocked by how light she made it seem. So, good job for Christine. While we were down in the Windy City, by the way, the Windy City is not Casper, it's Cheyenne. I've determined that the source of Wyoming's wind comes directly from the Capitol building itself. Of course, the legislature isn't in session, so the wind wasn't nearly as bad this weekend as it is when I'm usually down there. One thing we did notice while we were there, customer service, or the lack thereof. Now, I get it. If I lived in the capital city, I don't know that I would be all that excited about people coming in from out of town all the time. But you would think in the times when the legislature is not in session that the customer service would be up a couple of notches. But what the lovely Christine and I experienced was not that. Secondly, and very clearly, this one is not as common sense as you might assume, but if you're in Cheyenne from out of town, typically, you bring your pocketbook with you. You're going to go to restaurants that you don't have in your hometown. My guess is you're going to be more likely to leave a higher tip than you might otherwise, say, your local pizza joint that you might visit more frequently than you do the capital city. Anyway, you might assume that that should translate into a higher level of customer service, but where Cheyenne is concerned, you would be wrong about that. Now I realize it might just be a matter of the establishments that Christine and I patronized. Let me give you an example. After we went for pizza on my birthday, the small group that was with me decided to go get a piece of pie when we were done. The waitress did bring our pie to the table, and we did have a jug of coffee to go with it. However, 2.5 cups into the jug of coffee, that's total, not continuous, it was depleted. The waitress never came back to our table to check on us, never offered to fill up our coffee, and we had to track somebody down to get our check so that we could leave. Worse than that, we also had to track somebody else down to take our money. But anyway, I think you get the point. Customer service for the entire weekend pretty much followed that same pattern. I attribute all of this failure of customer service in the fact that young people don't ever really have to deal with other people. They can order everything offline, and if you've ever watched them walking down the street, they have their nose buried in their phone. So why would we expect that their interactions with us would be any different? They're not, and then we're surprised when we get crappy service at our local restaurants. All in all, though, we had a fun weekend, and we got back home safe, so I'm going to put the entire trip in the win column. On the way home, we, just like everybody else, heard the news about a second assassination attempt on President Donald Trump. 2. Most people don't survive one, but there again, we are talking about Donald Trump. I think the big story here, really, is how it was possible for 2 different people to make an attempt on the life of the former president. I'm not saying that, given the chance, more people wouldn't attempt to do the very same thing. But what I am talking about is how the Secret Service allowed it to happen a second time. I mean, their whole job is to protect elected officials, namely the President of the United States. All the time, the Secret Service is tracking down leads all across the country of people who make various threats on the lives of the president and others. Former presidents also have Secret Service protection. However, at the press conference following this second assassination attempt, the Florida sheriff said this.
At this level that he is at right now, he's not the sitting president. If he was, we would have had this entire golf course around him. Well, because he's not, security is limited to the areas that the Secret Service deems possible. So I would imagine that the next time he comes to the golf course, there'll probably be a little bit more people around the perimeter.
Okay, fair enough. He's not the sitting president, but he's already been shot at once. So wouldn't you think there would be a little bit of heightened security around wherever Donald Trump is at? We'll finish up the program in just a second. But first, let's get a word in from our sponsors. Today's installment of Monday Reload is brought to you by the Buffalo Wool Company. It's starting to get chilly now, and you need to pay attention to your feet. There's nothing worse than going outside and having to freeze your little pinky toes off. You can prevent that with a pair of socks from the Buffalo Wool Company. Go to their website, thebuffalowoolco.com. Trust me, you're not going to be disappointed. Morton Buildings is your source for any type of metal structure. It doesn't matter what you're thinking about, a garage or a barn or something bigger like a roping arena or a warehouse. Give Nick and Jesse a call at Morton Buildings. Their phone number is 307-674-2532, or you can check them out at their website, mortonbuildings.com. Have you ever spent a lot of time crafting a heartfelt letter to the editor, only to have it rejected by the newspaper? Have you ever helped a friend proofread their op-ed, only to realize that it never got published? Wyoming Unpublished has decided to stop letting the biased news outlets control the public narrative. They want to post your letters to the editor, your opinion pieces, and cartoons that other outlets won't touch. Wyoming Unpublished is looking for real letters on issues that matter most to Wyoming residents. Here's the rules. Please forward the piece that you initially sent to the Cowpie, the Casper Star Tribune, or others news outlets to wyomingunpublished@gmail.com. Wyoming Unpublished will try hard to post your piece along with your name, town, date, and the outlet that rejected you. Let's stop letting activist journalists tell you what is important to you. Wyoming Unpublished is just getting started, and they would love to hear from you. And now, back to the program. Let me just take this another direction. At some point during every presidential campaign, both candidates start to receive security briefings. The reason for that is either one of them could end up being the president, and we want them to hit the ground running. All of us would assume, wrongly as it turns out, that the same type of thinking would apply to the safety of presidential candidates. The truth is, it does apply to just about everybody else. A federal witness gets more protection than a former president of the United States. Now, just think about that for a minute. A dirtbag witness for the federal government will be whisked away where nobody knows where they're at, so there's no possibility that anybody could get near them. And yet Donald Trump, a former president of the United States and potentially the next president of the United States, has to deal with people taking pot shots at him. I don't think that there's been another instance of a presidential candidate having two assassination attempts. Now, I suppose we could go back to Abraham Lincoln. It's historical fact that John Wilkes Booth did attend President Lincoln's inauguration, and he was armed at the event. He just couldn't get close enough to him. And it was, of course, John Wilkes Booth that killed him later at Ford's Theater. But that was the same guy. And we didn't have the level of surveillance that we have now. We didn't have the technological advancements to look for dangerous people like we do now. And there wasn't the absolutely clear evidence that people are trying to kill him. I've only been to one Trump event, and that was the rally that was held in Casper. I had a ticket to the VIP reception before the rally, and you couldn't get anywhere close to that arena with even a pocket knife. Let me tell you how I know that. I walked up to the security screening, and I just inadvertently had not taken my pocket knife out of my pocket. I had to walk back to my car, leave my knife in my car, get back in the security line, go all the way through it again, and get patted down for a second time before I could enter the Casper Event Center. Pretty stiff security, if you ask me. And now you're telling me that this whack job, Ryan Roush, was able to hide in the bushes next to Donald Trump's golf course with a rifle, and nobody saw him creep in there next to the chain link fence. Secondly, the would-be assassin has a really, really long criminal record. In the past little bit, he's had over 100 interactions with police in various states. Most people hardly ever have any interactions with the cops. He's a convicted felon who's found to be in possession of an automatic weapon, an offense that carries with it a mandatory prison sentence. It's not up to the judge, it's mandatory. He's super active on social media. That should have been a red flag for the Secret Service right there. So the question is, why wasn't this guy on the Secret Service's radar to begin with? Why didn't they know he was liable to harm the president if given the opportunity? Maybe they were too busy watching his numerous media appearances from Ukraine. There's a pretty decent article on ZeroHedge.com right now that goes through all of Routh's appearances on Newsweek, the Financial Times, and the New York Times. It's entitled, Would-Be Trump Assassin Palled Around with Neo-Nazi Azov Brigade in Ukraine. What did the government know? And I quote, perhaps the most interesting angle to attempted Trump assassin Ryan Routh's recent history is his Ukraine connection. We documented that when he went to Ukraine to recruit for its International Legion in 2022, he was a Western mainstream media darling for a time, having been quoted on behalf of the cause to get more foreign fighters thrown into the battle against Russia by a who's who of major media sources, from the Financial Times to Newsweek to the New York Times. But when he arrived in Ukraine, according to these media reports, the 58-year-old Routh found himself to be considered too old to fight alongside the Ukrainian army. Quote, so Plan B, Routh described at one outlet, was to come to Kyiv and promote the idea of many others coming to join the International Legion. We need thousands of people here to fight alongside Ukrainians, he said. End quote. The piece goes through several different interactions that Routh had with the mainstream press. The U.S. government absolutely knew who this guy was. And then there's his Twitter feed, where there was all sorts of anti-Trump propaganda that he pushed out to all of his 17 or 18 Twitter followers. His page has since been taken down, but I'm sure it was more than that. The long and the short of all of this is the U.S. government absolutely knew who Ryan Wesley Routh was. Aside from being a convicted felon, he had all sorts of connections with the media, traveled to Ukraine, had connections with neo-Nazis inside Ukraine. So there's no excuse for the Secret Service or the FBI or anyone else in the federal government to know who this guy was and to be monitoring him. But evidently, they didn't do that. The result of all of this could have been catastrophic. Thank God it wasn't. Lots more is going to come out in the coming days about who this guy is, and I'll make sure I keep you posted. But for right now, I've got to head off to the building inspector's office to camp out until I get a building permit approved. For now, from the base of the Bighorns at the Cowboy State Politics Studio, I'm David Iverson, and this is the one and only Cowboy State Politics.